Hello, I'm Sunil Khilnani, and I'm really pleased to be able to join you. Of course, I would have liked to have been with you live when you meet on Saturday morning, but the time difference has made that difficult, and so I'm grateful that Milind suggested that I could be in touch with you through this pre-recorded video. And I'm first of all delighted that you have decided to read Incarnations. It's an honor for me that you've picked that book. And I'm also intrigued and impatient to know what you all are going to say about it. Perhaps it's a good idea that I'm not in the Zoom call when you are discussing it so that you can discuss it completely freely. But I'd certainly be interested to know what your critical thoughts and comments about the book are, because the book really was intended as a book to provoke discussion and conversation and argument, both about the selection of the figures, and we can come to that, I'll say something about that in a minute, but also in the way that it tries to bring these figures into life as historical figures, in a sense, to take them out of their mythic stature, which they've often been encased in, and to make them into living beings again. So I thought maybe I'd first just say a little bit about why I decided to write this book. And the main reason, I guess, was that I wanted to write a connected history of India, a history that really began from the first historical origins of the subcontinent and brought it up to the present in a way that was not the usual way of doing those histories. The standard way is to talk about dynasties or religious currents or these big entities that are supposed to have made Indian history. And very often I thought that was too abstract. It was very difficult to follow these endless names of dynasties, the rise and fall, in a kind of way that was very hard to make sense of. Some of you will remember it from your textbooks, and unfortunately it's still the way the textbooks are written in India. And I think that's one of the reasons why young Indians don't necessarily have a very firm grasp of our past. So I wanted to write a connected history, but I wanted to do it in a way that would be engaging, that would appeal not just to my professional colleagues, but also to a wider audience. Of course, in professional academic history, there tends to be this very specialized work. So people will work on a particular decade or a very precise defined field and will rarely step outside that field. And of course, that's good because it means that they're always secure in what they're talking about. But it also means that they never engage in the longer questions, the deeper questions about the meaning and pattern of Indian history. So I was taking a risk, in a sense, of stepping out of my professional expertise, which is on the modern period, 20th century India, and deciding to write this long history. But I thought someone had to do it. And the way I wanted to do it was through looking at these individual lives, lives which the reason I selected these particular lives was several. I wanted lives, first of all, that were historical, so not to say mythic characters, but people who actually existed in history. Therefore, that's the reason I start with the Buddha, because the Buddha is obviously a religious figure, but he's also someone whom we know existed. There's archaeological evidence, there's textual evidence that this was a historical figure who moved across the subcontinent. So I wanted to start with to choose historical figures. The second criteria was that I was interested in figures who had a kind of afterlife, who were not just significant in the moment of the living of their lives, but who also became part of the historic substance of the subcontinent, who in a sense, whose lives continue to resonate even in India today. So in that sense, who were incarnated at different points in Indian history. And thirdly, I wanted to take figures who were all historical, that's to say, no longer alive, that they had died. So I didn't take any present day figures because I felt that one couldn't really be properly historical about them. And fourthly, of course, I took figures that were interesting to me, figures that I thought could tell or illuminate some interesting aspect of India's past and present. So they had to be figures that I was interested in talking about. And in thinking about this long arc of India's history and how it's made us what we are, I was not just engaging in a backward looking exercise. I wanted to kind of nudge us forward into how we could think about what we want to be, and not just what we have been, but on the basis of understanding what we have been, how we might want to be in the future. The the other thing that I sort of wanted to do in taking these individuals is, we very often see them today as venerable saints. These are figures who are literally statues. They are fossilized. They're no longer, in a sense, with any life in them. And I wanted to bring them to life. And I wanted, above all, to show that, when they began their lives, their careers, they were very often angry young men and women. They were not these staid, venerable saints, but they were fighting against their society, fighting against their family, against their caste, against the traditions, and they were trying to make space for individual voices, for their own voices. And I think it's really important to remember that about these figures whom we now think of as these, great wise men and women of Indian history. They began life as rebels. And I thought for young Indians today, it's important to see that, to take inspiration from that, and to feel confidence that, they too can be critical and not necessarily accepting the ways that things have been done, critical of authority, critical of the inherited ways of doing things, in order to create something better, in order to create something that allows more possibility for individual expression. So that was another thing I wanted to do. Just about the making of the project. I was writing the book at the same time as I was also making a radio series with the BBC. So this book was not just written at my desk or in the archives. Of course, the research was done in the library, in the archives, at my desk. But the writing of the book, and in a sense also much of the collection of the material for the book, was very much on the road. I literally took 3 long road trips across India while I was recording the series that was broadcast on Radio 4. And these trips took me to the places where the individuals I was writing about lived. Their homes, in some cases their houses were still there, the cities where they were, sometimes the landscape. So whether it was Vijayanagar, where Krishnadevara ruled, or the fort at Janjira, where Malik Ambar lived, or Calcutta, where of course Bose and Tagore and Satyajit Ray all lived. By visiting these actual places, I think I learned something more about the individuals, seeing the landscape, seeing the rivers that they lived by, for example, Basava, or seeing the streets on which they live, for example, Ramanujan's house. These things helped me to understand how they saw the world. And that was, I think, important. And I hope that sense of the concreteness, the tangibility of their worlds comes across in the way I've written about their lives. And finally, I wanted to have a mix of some figures who are extremely well known, of course, the Buddha or many of the figures that there you'll recognize. But there's also a number of figures who I think you may not have heard about. And I wanted to surprise people as well. So for instance, Nansuk, the 17th century miniature painter, who's an extraordinary figure. We don't know much about him, but I tried to reconstruct his life from his work. Or this figure of Chidambaram Pillai, the Tamil nationalist, who, in a sense, his life ended in defeat. It was not a success story like many of the other nationalists whom we know about. But I thought, even in looking at his life and looking at why he was defeated and what his hopes were, we could learn a lot about him and India's history at the moment. Or a figure like Malik Amber, who I think is not that well known, but I think can tell us a lot about our own attitudes, not just about Indian history in the 15th and 16th century, but our own attitudes towards about race and so forth. So those are just some of the thoughts I wanted to share with you. Brief kind of introductory remarks. But as I say, I hope that this book will prompt a conversation and an argument. I never intended these 50 to be a final and settled number. It's my selection. Others, each of you will have your own 50 or your own names that you would want to add or you think have been excluded. And I think that's part of what I wanted to do, to prompt a discussion about our past, to make us think about who are the interesting figures, who are the important figures, who are the ones whom we think we should know more about and be included in the way we understand our past. So over to your conversation, and I hope it's a enjoyable and productive session that you have with your book club. And thank you once again for taking the time to read the book. Goodbye.